Good morning, subscribers. It's Geekonomics here, bringing you what is the penultimate chapter in the 100-year life. And of course we had a meeting about this with regard to the debate which we're going to be engaged in hopefully February, March time next year. So this is all going to culminate in something very big and very special, so very much looking forward to that. So, chapter 8. The title of this particular chapter is Time. Not something I've got a lot of actually this morning, so I'm going to give you a fairly whistle-stop tour of chapter 8. But the basic gist of this particular chapter is what has happened to the amount of leisure time that we have, and what are we doing with that leisure time? Do we actually have a lot of free time and space to do our own thing, or in modern society have we filled all of our leisure time with so many things that actually our leisure time is no longer a time of relaxation? So you'll be familiar, obviously, from our readings of this particular book, that in your extra long life you could either work more, or you could invest more time in developing skills, be that education, learning to play an instrument, or you could simply invest some of that extra time in doing nothing at all and maybe just watching the television. So those are a few things that you can do with those extra years of life. Now, an interesting fact here is that oftentimes people in the UK, we often complain about being time poor. But actually, the amount of hours that we spend working have been declining ever since the Industrial Revolution. During the times of the Industrial Revolution, people used to work between 10 and 16-hour days. And it only came into being in 1847 that there was some type of legislation to restrict the amount of time that people were working to less than 10 hours per day. So excuse me whilst I just move the camera along, ladies and gentlemen, viewers and subscribers, just to this final section. Now, our friend John Maynard Keynes, esteemed economist, he talked about an income effect and a substitution effect. And it's interesting that we should be covering this because I've just covered this very topic yesterday with my A2, Year 2 A-level students. And the basic gist of what Keynes said many moons ago was that if you have a higher income, then you will obviously be able to enjoy more goods and services. And perhaps as a consequence of having more income, you might also have more leisure time. Now, if you look at what actually is happening nowadays, people are enjoying more goods and services. However, that does not necessarily mean that they are working less. And the reason that they are not working less is, there are many reasons why. But the fact that they enjoy those material things in life means that they necessarily have to work in order to fulfill that lifestyle which they've become very much accustomed to. So yes, they may be time poor, but that may be somewhat of their own doing. Now, I've been looking at this individual supply curve of labour with my students in the sixth one, and this really it sort of stems and merges quite nicely together. So if you consider somebody, this is their wage rate and this is the time they spend at work, as your wage increases, you work longer. And as your wage increases, you work longer and longer and longer. Now, there's an income effect going on there, and that income effect is, well, you're earning more income and therefore you're preferring to spend more time at work rather than having more leisure time. So the more time you're working, the less leisure time you have. Now, there comes a point in time when many people will argue, well, actually, I want to work less, and actually because I'm earning a higher income, I can afford to work less hours and maybe enjoy the same standard of living as I did previously. And so we get this substitution of leisure for work. So people engage in more leisure time rather than work. And so this backward bending section of the supply curve starts to emerge, and this is because of the thing called the substitution effect. Now, we discussed this in class yesterday, and whether or not people can actually engage in that very substitution effect, that would be called into question. because it's not always the case that if you're a very high earner, earning very high wages, it's not always the case that you can then reduce the amount of time that you're at work just like that. Especially if you're a CEO of a big company, you can't just decide, right, I'm earning lots of money and therefore I'm going to reduce the number of hours I'm working. So we would need to call that into question. And then to conclude on this particular chapter, Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott, they talk about the fact that there's a certain feel-good factor for some people. Some people enjoy being busy, so it gives them a bit of a buzz. They feel that they're in demand. And the top earners, particularly, think that the success of their company is to do with all of the hours that they work. And so they work more and more and more. And another few very interesting points just to conclude. Is commuting a part of work? People who live in London can spend hours and hours commuting. Well, is that part of your work time? Is that part of your leisure time? You decide. But oftentimes for people nowadays, as I started off by saying, leisure time is no longer free time. Your leisure time is filled with so many things, Xbox, you name it, all these modern gadgets, and so it's no longer your free time. And one final point, I've got a class coming in, so I'm going to rush the final part of this. Henry Ford, Ford Motor Company, introduced the 40-hour working week in 1914. In 1938, Europe started to restrict the number of working hours. Today in the UK it's 37 hours, and today in the UK we're offered a very generous 25 days paid leave with most jobs. In the USA it's only 12 days. So there's a few things there to mull over, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be cutting this off now because there's a class going into the G-Economics suite, very privileged, so bye.